Greetings and welcome to the Transform Podcast. I'm your host, Christopher Anastasio. It is Friday, June 17th, 2022, and this is episode 67. So welcome back, guys. Appreciate you guys checking in with us again before the weekend comes for our latest episode. Today, I wanted to kind of talk briefly about podcasting. And, you know, it's kind of ironic. We're doing a podcast here, and I do not believe we've ever done an entire episode about podcasting. I've referred to it along the way, of course, especially when talking about voice content, how flexible and versatile voice content can be for your marketing efforts, for your social media marketing. But we never totally dedicated an entire episode end to end about it. I think I was just kind of searching back through past episodes and way back, I think in the episode 30-ish range, I was actually talking to you guys about using Twitter Spaces, where you have sort of these audio groups that formulate on Twitter to go ahead and basically capture potential podcast topics and generate interest in them and be somewhat impromptu about your potential podcast episodes that you then carry over to your official podcast and really execute on that platform. So there's been some talk here about it. And like I said, I think it's been part of some of the episodes along the way. But today I wanted to focus just exclusively on, you know, why you might want to do a podcast and then where you should do it. And I think those are kind of the two main topics that I want to cover today. And one of the things that made me even think about doing this episode, it's kind of funny, just consuming actually a lot of TikTok content lately, but also seeing this a lot on Instagram too, like Instagram Reels and in the news feed, the regular feed, is this sort of phenomenon of personalities or individuals, you know, individual brands, sort of looking like they're on a podcast, but you can't really tell if it's a real podcast or not. And so what I mean by that is, you'll see them, you know, with a microphone in front of them, you know, in a desk or, you know, some kind of surface that they're sitting behind. So it looks kind of official. And then there'll be an interviewer who's usually someone not recognizable, just sort of a no-name individual who's asking them a question or a series of questions, who also has a microphone in front of them. And it occurred to me the other day, I was seeing this trend. I mean, it was just like, you know, it was kind of all over the place. You know, definitely not confined to one industry, but, you know, just various accounts that I saw were using this tactic. And I said to myself, I was like, okay, this is catching on. This is a thing now where you have sort of a podcast, a video podcast format where the podcast participants are being filmed and then the video of that podcast being recorded is being distributed as content. And so who knows if any of these things are real or if they're all not real or some of them are real and some of them aren't. But it really made me think about, okay, you know, podcasting by itself is powerful, but the imagery of someone participating in a podcast now looks significant as well. That actually looks like something authoritative, something that adds credibility, something that's being used to sort of package a message, but in a very authoritative format, right? Because when you see somebody appearing on a podcast, you think, okay, well, they were asked to come on to that show. They were asked to be part of that podcast. And they were, you know, essentially, you know, good enough or better than that in terms of being an attractive guest to appear on that show. So that's it. Kind of got the gears turning a little bit, and then it kind of turned into, well, I don't think we've ever done an episode about it here. So let's talk about that. Why would you want to start a podcast for your business? So I think that when you think about the premier types of content that you can create, like what's really the pinnacle thing that you can create of all the content that you can decide to go with, you know, short form video, textual, blogs, videos, voice. I think at the very top, at least right now, even though it may not be the most popular content by pure consumption, I'm kind of looking at it from both a consumption standpoint and sort of a perception standpoint. Right? If you put those two together, I think the pinnacle thing you can do is basically start your own television show on YouTube. right? Where you consistently, and that's a key term here. If you don't do it consistently, then you've failed, I think, to establish this kind of content as a pinnacle content pillar. But if you consistently and regularly and competently publish video on YouTube, that's probably the best thing you can do from both a consumption and a perception standpoint. Say, hey, I have a YouTube channel, I have X hundred videos on there, go check it out, go subscribe to my YouTube channel. There's a lot of heft to that from an authority perspective. That's where I'm talking about the perception side of this. So if you consider that position number one, I would say 1A is a podcast. So the reason I say 1A is because, of course, video content is the most popular content out there. Okay, and it's what people want to consume on their mobile devices and to entertain them and so on and so forth. And getting the visuals and the audio is always going to do that better in some way, shape, or form, right? But if you cannot or are not willing to create a YouTube channel, for this pillar content channel that you want to set up for your business, I think starting a podcast is an excellent alternative, okay? And the reason I say that is because of a few things. Number one, yes, let's acknowledge it doesn't have video involved with it, although you can do video podcasts. If you ever get to the point where you're comfortable, then you can actually turn your podcast into videos and now you're good to go. But let's say before you ever get to that point, number one, your podcast is going to take advantage of the very unique characteristic of voice versus text and video that does not require the person who's consuming it to fully be paying attention. Okay, and by paying attention, I mean, obviously you want them to listen to what you're saying, but I mean to be fully available, hands, legs, eyes, ears, etc., in order to consume that content. So again, specifically, textual content, the person must stare at and read the content. They can't do the dishes, they can't drive the car, they can't change the diaper. Okay, they have to be reading the text to consume the content. With video, same thing. They have to employ their eyeballs, right? They have to be looking at the video for it to really have its full impact. Now, some videos you can listen to and you can just check in on them and you can look back and forth, and that might be acceptable. But for the most part, if it's a video, there's a reason it's a video. You're supposed to be watching it, okay? So audio content, you can do everything you need to be doing that you think you need to be doing from a multitasking perspective while you are listening to the podcast. You can drive the car, you can change the diaper, you can wash the dishes, you can restock the pantry, and you can have a podcast running. So because you're now in an audio-only format, you're taking advantage of that very unique dynamic. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, podcasts are just sort of perceived, and I know I came across some polling or some statistics on this at some point, and I didn't have them handy for this episode, but podcasts are perceived to be like an authoritative source of information. Like saying you have a podcast is actually a pretty big deal. I mean, it's a pretty big deal to say that you have one, in terms of the resonance with the particular audience you might be trying to reach. So podcasts are looked upon very favorably from an authority perspective, okay? And I'm talking this now more from the perspective of your target audience, okay? As I said before, a YouTube channel, that's consistently populated is also very authoritative, but I'm kind of looking at that more from a marketing perspective, from like a marketer standpoint. It would be like the top kind of thing that you could create. But definitely amongst your audience, the fact that you have a podcast, there's going to be some resonance there in terms of your authority level, your credibility level, your sophistication level, that sort of thing. So that's kind of the second reason that I would say having a podcast is a great sort of 1A kind of alternative to, let's say, having your own YouTube channel. Now, the other thing I would say is sort of a third reason would be the fact that you can take your podcasts and you can turn them into text, and you now have ancillary content. You can have blog posts from there, you can have an article series. If it's a particularly long podcast, you can chop it up into pieces. You can take little pieces out of that text and make tweets out of them. So there's so much you can do with your podcast in a post-production, from a post-production standpoint. I mean, much like you can with a YouTube video, for example, but you don't lose a whole lot of that by doing a podcast because you can go to text. So just the fact that you've got the voice dynamic in terms of consumption, practicality, the fact that you have the authority perception from your audience, and the fact that you can repurpose into text, these are three very strong reasons why you should think about starting a podcast for your business and why it can be very, very advantageous to you. Okay? Now, where you do your podcast is an interesting question. There's a lot of choices on doing that, and I can attest to the one that we use at Transform. It's also a channel I used, platform that I used for another podcast, one that I'd started on a totally different topic, separate from this. And so now I've used it a couple times over, and that's Anchor, Anchor. So obviously you may be listening to our podcast right now on Anchor, but you may not be, because Anchor, once you've recorded into their app, distributes your podcast across multiple channels. Okay, so Anchor will put your podcast on Spotify. It will put your podcast on Apple Podcasts. It will put your podcast on Google Cast or whichever one they have, and several other smaller channels. Okay, in fact, this is not an exhaustive list. Just be very clear about that. There's a series of, or multitude of channels that they shotgun the distribution out to once you've recorded in the app. And it is just a super, super simple format. I mean, you come into the app, you have your episode listings, so you can kind of look at all the episodes in the past. You can grab links off of there or share directly to Twitter and Facebook and Snapchat and so on and so forth. Send a text, with a link to your podcast, all that kind of stuff. At the same time, you can also go into the analysis tab. You can look at analysis on all your podcasts and how they're performing. And then you can go over to the record button. Just you come over to where the tools are, hit one or two taps, boom, you start recording. That recording goes into a library that's stored on the app, or you can just kind of flow through and immediately upload it and schedule publication, either publish right at that time, or you can schedule publication for a future date and time. So it's got a lot of functionality that just keeps things really simple and really smooth, and it's great. I mean, it's an absolute wonderful podcasting tool. I learned of it personally from Gary Vaynerchuk a few years back. He was doing an episode or something about podcasting, and he said that Anchor was the preferred platform to work off of for both recording and then multi-distributing your podcast to various channels. So, all that being said, guys, and like I said before, the fact that you can do video podcasts, I think Anchor recently integrated that capability with what they already had. So there's some ways that you can do video podcasting with Anchor. Have not used that myself yet. We've talked about it, Transform, how we might do that down the road. But just the fact that capability is there is a great thing. And the fact that, like I said, I'm seeing content more and more that features people, in a video format doing a podcast. It's just a really, really versatile platform that I think you'd really get a lot out of if you chose to do it on Anchor. But there are other ones out there, and you can kind of play around with them, or test them out for yourself, or do some browsing on that. So we've gone about 15 minutes. I think we're going to start to wrap this up here, but I think just it's something to think about, guys. I mean, if you're seeking a way to really focus your social media marketing efforts at the heaviest center of gravity that you can, I do think that you probably want to start with looking at either a YouTube channel or a podcast. It's not to say the other channels are no good. I mean, if you say, hey, Chris, I'm going to do all my marketing on TikTok, or I'm going to do all my marketing on Twitter, that can work too. It's not to disparage those things. But if you're really looking for something that, just because of the production requirements, coming up with an entire episode for a podcast or coming up with an entire episode for a YouTube video, I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. And I think having a fully populated podcast, a fully populated YouTube channel, these things probably just over time with a large sample set, they carry a little more weight. But yeah, if you're posting 5 TikToks a day every day for a year and you have 1,500 TikTok videos, you're going to be in good shape too. So anyway, that as an aside, definitely think about podcasting, guys. If you have any questions about how to proceed with that, let us know. We'll definitely be ready to help you with that and advise you. And in the meantime, if you want to check us out on Facebook or LinkedIn, just go over and type in Pransform. We can go to the website, pransform.com. And of course, we appreciate you subscribing to our podcast, sharing it, liking it. Means a lot to us. So we're going to wrap up here. We'll be back next week, episodes 68 and 69, as we start to head towards July and the middle of the year. And should be exciting as we round the corner into the 70s, I think, once August comes around. So anyway, thanks for your support. As always, guys, like I said, reach out to us if you have any questions or you want to get a free consultation with us or, social media audit. In the meantime, hope everybody has a great weekend, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Bye-bye.